She froze. The words were there, carved into concrete, black against gray. Girls can't shoot. Why did it sting more than it should? Maybe because it wasn't new. Maybe because she'd read those same words in one form or another 100 times in the faces of men who dismissed her before she ever touched a rifle. But here, at Fort Braxton, it felt heavier. The message wasn't just graffiti. It was a challenge. Staff Sergeant Maria Santis shifted the weight of her duffel bag on her shoulder. Boots pressing into the sun-baked asphalt, the Georgia heat sat. On her chest, like armor she hadn't asked for. She was used to carrying weight, but not this kind. The kind you can't put down. The kind you can't hand off to anyone else. She scanned the sniper range in silence. Wind flags twitched in the faint breeze. Targets gleamed under the hard sun. The hills in the distance bent the air in invisible. Tunnels, creating traps for bullets and traps for shooters. She studied it all, memorizing the landscape the way some people memorize prayers, because to her, this was holy ground, and already it was telling her the truth. The truth was simple. This place would test her, harder than anything before. And from the second-floor office window, she knew someone was watching. General Robert Hayes leaned against the glass, arms folded. He was older, silver hair close-cropped, his chest heavy with medals that told stories of wars fought before she'd been born. His office walls held photographs with presidents, awards from campaigns, reminders of a career that belonged to another era, an era where rules were clear, traditions were law, and women never stood on the sniper range as instructors. The Pentagon's phone call still echoed in his ears. "General, we're sending you the Army's first female sniper instructor. Her record is exemplary." Records. Hayes had scoffed at records. Records didn't matter when the air shook with incoming fire, when the only thing that kept a squad alive was the man behind the scope. Records didn't matter when men bled, but he hadn't said that. He'd swallowed it. Like so many things in uniform. "Yes, sir," he told them. And now here she was, a lone figure on his range. Maria could almost feel his eyes on her. She straightened, forcing her shoulders square. She would not be small today. Boot steps. 6 young men approached from the side, recruits who would soon be hers to train. Their voices carried, loud enough to make sure she heard. "She's never even deployed," one sneered. "My sister could outshoot her," another said. Laughter following like broken glass. "Maybe they'll give her pink ammo." She'd heard it before basic advanced schools, every assignment where she'd been the first or the only. But this felt different. These weren't random soldiers. These were the men she had to teach, the men who might live or die by the lessons she gave them. She stepped forward, calm, controlled, every move measured. "Gentlemen," her voice sliced through their laughter, "I'm Staff Sergeant Santis, your new instructor." The air shifted. The tallest of them, a corporal with arms like tree trunks, eyed her from head to toe. His skepticism wasn't subtle. "Ma'am," he said, too much weight on the word. "With all due respect, most of us have been shooting since we could walk. What exactly are you going to teach us?" She opened her mouth, ready to answer, when a sharper rhythm cut across the concrete. "Dress shoes, not boots, General Hayes." The men snapped to attention. His presence was a shadow that swallowed the space, a force felt before it was seen. His gaze locked on her, not them. "Staff Sergeant," he said, the words heavy, like a test he already knew she'd fail. "I trust you're getting acquainted with your students." "Yes, sir," she answered, steady, though inside she felt every eye drilling into her. Hayes turned to the recruits. His voice carried across the range, practiced from years of command. "Men, Staff Sergeant Santis comes to us with impressive credentials. The Pentagon seems to think she can teach you something about marksmanship." The tone, that poisonous tone that wrapped words in barbed wire. He looked back at her. "I'm curious to see what those credentials look like in practice." Her pulse thumped in her ears. He wasn't hiding it. This wasn't mentorship. This was theater. She had a choice, retreat or rise. "General," she said, her voice even though her heart raced, "I'd be happy to demonstrate whatever techniques you think would benefit your soldiers." His lips pulled into something resembling a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Excellent. I believe in leading by example, Staff Sergeant. If you're going to train these men to be the best marksmen in the Army, they should see what the best looks like." The recruits shifted, sensing the tension between their commander and their new instructor. Maria knew it then. This wasn't about training. This wasn't about skill. This was a trap, but backing down wasn't an option. If she flinched here, she might as well pack her bags. "What did you have in mind, sir?" The general's smile widened. "Oh, I think we can arrange something special. Something that will give everyone on this base a chance to see what the Army's first female sniper instructor can do." He paused. Let the silence thicken. Let the air carry his meaning. "I'll make the arrangements. Consider it your official welcome to Fort Braxton." He walked away, and with every step, she felt it more clearly. This wasn't going to be a battlefield halfway across the world. Her war was here, in Georgia. Her enemy wasn't an insurgent, but doubt itself, and already, the graffiti seemed to whisper, "Girls can't shoot." The next morning, the parade ground overflowed. Normally, maybe 200 soldiers. That day, almost 800. They were there for her, or rather, for her failure. General Hayes stood at the podium, silver stars glinting in the merciless sun. Maria's stomach churned, but she kept her chin high. He began, his voice booming across the formation. "We have among us today someone the Pentagon believes represents the future of Army marksmanship training. Staff Sergeant Maria Santis has been assigned as our new sniper instructor." A murmur rolled through the crowd. A flicker of heat burned across her cheeks, but her face didn't move. Hayes didn't stop. "Now, I'm sure Staff Sergeant Santis is very qualified on paper, but we all know paper and the real world are very different things. So I've decided to give her an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities." He turned, gesturing toward the horizon. Devil's Canyon. The name alone made the air shift. Soldiers craned their necks, even from 2 miles away. The jagged scar in the earth was visible. For those who didn't know, Hayes explained. Crosswinds there reached over 30 miles per hour. Gusting, unpredictable. Snipers whispered about it like a curse. Shots lost to the canyon never came back. Careers ended there. "The target," Hayes continued, his tone almost theatrical, "will be a 2-inch steel plate, 1,400 yards, nearly 3/4 of a mile." Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Maria's chest tightened. 1,400 yards in perfect conditions was near impossible. In Devil's Canyon, it was suicide. Colonel Martinez, the second in command, stepped forward. "Uneasy. General, sir, perhaps we should—" Hayes silenced him with a raised hand. "If Staff Sergeant Santis can make this shot, I'll recommend her for any advanced training she desires. I'll write to the Secretary of the Army myself, but if she misses—" He let the pause stretch. Soldiers leaned forward, listening. "I will personally recommend her immediate transfer to a position more suited to her experience level, and I will submit a formal report questioning the wisdom of this entire program." Her throat dried. Her career, the careers of every woman who might follow, balanced on one impossible bullet. The silence of 800 soldiers hung like a storm cloud. Her own voice surprised her, stronger than she felt. "I accept the challenge." The crowd erupted. Cheers, groans, whispers. Hayes smiled again, but in his eyes, surprise, maybe. Even a flicker of respect that she hadn't flinched. "Excellent," he said. "The demonstration will take place in 72 hours. At 0800, that should give Staff Sergeant Santis adequate time to prepare." The formation broke. Some soldiers clapped her on the shoulder. Some shook their heads, others just stared. One recruit, Corporal Jackson, lingered. His voice lowered. "Sergeant, that shot I've been stationed here 2 years. I've never seen anyone hit it. Not once. The wind's too wild. She forced a smile. Thanks for the encouragement. But when he walked away, her mask slipped. Sergeant First Class Williams passed by. Older, hard-edged. "Ma'am," he muttered, "I've got nothing against you. But Hayes just set you up to fail. That shot isn't difficult. It's impossible." By the time the crowd thinned, Maria was alone. Alone with her thoughts, alone. With the canyon in the distance, her phone buzzed, a text. From her father, a retired Marine sniper who taught her to breathe with the wind. "Heard about your situation. Remember what I taught you. It's not about the shot. It's about the shooter. Make them remember your name." She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she pocketed the phone and started toward the armory. 72 hours, 1 bullet, 1 life. Her name, and every woman's name, was writing on it, and the trap was set. Why did her phone keep buzzing? By noon, the first day after Hayes' announcement, Maria had stopped counting. 17 calls. Half of them from numbers she didn't recognize. The first was a reporter from Military Times, his voice too eager. "Too hungry. Staff Sergeant Santis, this is unprecedented. A general betting his reputation against yours. Can you comment?" She hung up before he finished. But silence wasn't protection anymore. Within hours, the story had spread. Military blogs, social media, cable news, headlines multiplied. Female sniper faces impossible shot. General Hayes challenges Pentagon experiment, career on the line at Devil's Canyon. Her least favorite came from a tabloid. Army's first female sniper instructor. Mission impossible. By evening, the clip of Hayes' speech had gone viral. She watched herself on a grainy phone recording, standing at attention as her own voice carried across the formation. "I accept the challenge." Did she look terrified? She felt it, but on camera, she seemed steady, determined. Was that strength, or just the armor she had learned to wear? Her sister's voice crackled through the phone that night. "Carmen, back in San Antonio." "Maria, what the hell are you thinking?" Worry bled through every syllable. "Dad's been pacing the house for hours. Mom's lighting candles at church. They're scared. Maria, so am I." She pressed her forehead against the barracks window. In the distance, Devil's Canyon lay. In shadow, silent, waiting. "I didn't have a choice, Carmen. If I backed down, my career was over anyway. And if you miss?" Maria closed her eyes. "Then at least I go down swinging." The second day began before dawn. She was at the range by 0500, studying the wind like it was scripture. Binoculars pressed to her eyes. The flags snapped like whips, twisting unpredictably. She traced dust devils spiraling up from the canyon floor, cataloging every shift, every flicker of motion. She wasn't the only one watching. Outside the gate, a news van idled, satellite dish pointed skyward. A small cluster of protesters held signs that read "Support our female soldiers" and "Equal opportunity." Equal challenge. It was no longer just about her. The weight of thousands pressed on her shoulders. She hadn't asked for it, but it was hers to carry. Colonel Martinez found her kneeling in the dirt, lips moving as she whispered calculations to herself. He cleared his throat. "Sergeant, this has escalated beyond what we anticipated. The Secretary of the Army's office called this morning. There. Concerned about optics." Maria lowered her binoculars. "Are they ordering me to withdraw?" "No, but they're sending observers. This has become more than a demonstration. It's a referendum." She heard it in his tone, the truth behind. The words, if she missed, they wouldn't just say Maria Santis had failed. They'd say women had failed. Her chest tightened. She had signed up to serve, to teach, to shoot, not to become a symbol. But choice had been stripped away. Symbols are chosen, not self-made. That afternoon, as she charted ballistics tables in the shade of the range tower, her phone rang again, a gravelly, commanding voice on the other end. "Staff Sergeant Santis. This is General Patricia Morrison, retired." Maria nearly dropped the phone. General Morrison. The first woman to command a combat brigade, a legend. Ma'am, Maria stammered. It's an honor. Cut the formality. I'm calling because I know exactly what you're facing. 30 years ago, I had my own impossible test, different. Battlefield, same truth. Prove you belong, or get out. Maria hesitated. How did you handle the pressure? Morrison's laugh was sharp. Badly. I wasted time worrying about what my failure would mean for other women. Don't make that mistake. When you're behind that rifle, it isn't about politics, it isn't about history, it's about you, the rifle, the target. Everything else is noise. The line clicked dead. Maria sat in silence, phone heavy in her hand, inspired, overwhelmed, and for the first time, afraid she might forget what mattered. That night, searching for answers, she buried herself in geological reports of devils. Canyon. The maps revealed why the winds twisted like living things. The canyon shape funneled air into violent patterns. No prediction model could tame it. To hit a target, there wasn't math. It was instinct. It was becoming part of the chaos. Still, she studied until her eyes ached, and then, on her way back from the mess hall, voices froze her in place. She stopped in the shadows near the officers' club. General Hayes's voice, low but sharp. Robert, this has gotten out of hand, Colonel Martinez said. CNN wants to broadcast the shot live. The Pentagon is breathing down our necks. Half the base thinks you've lost your mind. Hayes's reply was quieter, but Maria caught it. I never meant it to become a circus, but I can't back down. If I cancel, it looks like I'm protecting her, and if she makes the shot... Silence stretched. Maria strained to hear. Then I'll have been wrong about a lot of things. She slipped away before they saw her, but the truth landed hard. Hayes was trapped too, his reputation now bound to her bullet. If she missed, he won. If she hit, his entire worldview cracked. The third morning came with another weight. Maria was cleaning her rifle when Corporal Jackson approached, hesitant. Sergeant, I need to tell you something. Last night, I saw Sergeant Williams near your equipment locker. He was acting strange, looking over his shoulder, like he didn't want to be caught. Her stomach dropped. Williams, the veteran who told her she'd been set up to fail. Sabotage wasn't just rumor. It was here. Are you sure? She whispered. Jackson nodded grimly. Yes, ma'am. And? There's more. Soldiers are betting on you. The odds are 20-1 against. Anger burned in her chest. Betrayal, too. 20-1. Almost no one believed in her. Almost no one expected her to walk out with her career intact. But the numbers. At another meeting, 20-1 meant that if she succeeded, it wouldn't just silence a few skeptics. It would silence them all. She set the cleaning rod down, her hands steady now. If someone had sabotaged her rifle, then someone was afraid. And fear meant they understood the truth, that she could hit it, that she might change everything. The hours ticked down, the countdown. Wasn't just toward a trigger pull, it was toward a reckoning. And Maria knew the canyon wasn't the only enemy she had to face. Why was the lock hanging open? The armory should have been silent, deserted in the pre-dawn hours. Yet when Maria approached her locker, her chest tightened. The padlock dangled loose. She forced her breathing steady and opened the door. Her rifle sat where it should have. But the scope mount her lifeline at long range was loose. Not much. Just enough that the shot would drift inches off at 1,400 yards. Inches meant failure. Inches meant humiliation broadcast live. Her throat closed. Someone had been here. Someone. Wanted her to fail. Son of a bitch, she whispered. Sergeant Santys. She spun, hand twitching toward the sidearm at her hip. Corporal Jackson stood in the doorway, pale under the flickering fluorescent lights. Behind him, 3 more soldiers, Rodriguez, Thompson, Nguyen, all men she'd trained with. All men who had laughed at her days earlier. She narrowed her eyes. What are you doing here? Jackson stepped forward, voice low but urgent. Ma'am, we need to talk. about what I saw, about what's been happening. Rodriguez, usually quiet, spoke up. We know someone's been tampering with your equipment. We've been keeping watch since yesterday. Maria blinked. You've been guarding my gear? Thompson, the same kid who joked about pink ammunition, nodded sheepishly. We may have doubted you at first, Sergeant, but what Hayes set up, it's not right. If you fail, it should be because the shot's impossible, not because someone cheated. Jackson pulled out his phone. His hand shook as he showed her the screen. I recorded this last night. The video was grainy, but unmistakable. Sergeant Williams, the veteran, his hands twisting her scope mount with quiet precision. Maria's stomach churned with fury, and something else, something unexpected. Gratitude. Why? She whispered. Rodriguez met her eyes. Because my sister wants to join the army someday. If they do this to you, they'll do it to her. And because soldiers should stand with each other when things get ugly, Thompson added, voice tight. And because we've been watching you train, you're good, Sergeant. Better than we thought. You deserve a fair shot. For the first time since she'd stepped foot on this base, Maria felt her throat tighten with emotion. She swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in her eyes. Thank you, she said, steady but soft. All of you. Jackson nodded. We've already sent the video to Colonel Martinez. He's on his way. Moments later, Martinez stormed in, face carved from anger. And behind him, General Hayes. The silence was suffocating as Martinez played the video again. Williams, exposed on the small screen, tightening screws, sealing Maria's fate. Sergeant Williams has been placed under arrest, Martinez said. His tone clipped. Maria's eyes flicked to Hayes. What she saw shocked her. Not cold satisfaction. Not smugness, but regret. Staff Sergeant, Hayes said slowly. When I issued this challenge, I intended it to be unfair, difficult, maybe even humiliating, but I never intended it to be rigged. What Williams did is a betrayal of everything we stand for. She searched his face for deceit. Found none. Sir, she asked quietly, are you calling off the demonstration? That's your choice, Hayes answered. Given the circumstances, no one would question it. Her gaze slid to her backup rifle, lying in its case. Then to the soldiers who had chosen to stand beside her. Then to the sound outside, the faint hum of a crowd already gathering. Her voice was firm. No, sir. The demonstration proceeds. Hayes's lips pressed into a thin line. I thought you'd say that. He nodded once. I'll personally inspect your rifle, and I'll post guards. No more interference. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Sergeant, when you take that shot, win or lose, it will be by your skill, nothing else. As the group filed out, Jackson lingered. Sergeant, word spreading about the sabotage soldiers who were betting against you. They're changing their minds. What do you mean? She asked. Thompson grinned faintly. The odds are shifting, 20 to 1's gone. Now it's even money. Turns out soldiers don't like cheaters. Maria exhaled slowly. For the first time since Hayes had set the trap, she felt something unexpected. A crack in the wall of doubt. A warmth that had nothing to do with the Georgia heat. She wasn't alone anymore. The morning of the demonstration, Fort Braxton looked like a carnival had collided with a battlefield. Over 1,200 people gathered at Devil's Canyon, soldiers, officers, Pentagon observers, families, reporters, news vans, satellite trucks. Floodlights glared off camera rigs, folding bleachers filled with cheering soldiers. Vendors hawked bottled water as though it were a sporting event. Maria felt every eye burning into her as she carried her rifle case toward the firing line. The Heidenvrie wind had already woken angry. Flags snapped like gunshots. Dust swirled in ghostly spirals along the canyon floor. The meteorology station read gusts at 35 miles per hour. Shifting without pattern, Colonel Martinez brought her the latest. Readings, Sergeant. Are you sure? She looked through her spotting scope. The target plate was barely visible. flickering in heat shimmer, a coin glinting at the edge of the world. "I'm sure," she said. Across the canyon rim, she caught sight of Hayes speaking with Pentagon officials, their body language sharp, urgent. She caught fragments of words carried on the wind, political ramifications, future of women in combat. Hayes broke away and approached her. His expression, for once, was bare. "When I issued this challenge," he said, voice low, "I thought I was making a point about standards, about tradition. I didn't think it would become a question of policy, of history." Maria's eyes didn't waver. "With respect, sir." That's exactly what it always was. For the first time, he didn't argue. He only nodded. "Then, for what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong." At 7:55, Maria took her place on the line. The crowd fell silent. She extended the bipod, settled the rifle into the dirt, adjusted her cheek weld. Breathing steady, through the scope, the steel plate wavered like a mirage. "Shooter," the range officer announced. "Prepare for final wind call. Gusting southwest, 32 miles per hour." She closed her eyes. Her father's voice echoed. "It's not about the target, Mia. It's about becoming one with the rifle, one with the wind, one with the moment." Her heartbeat slowed. The noise of the crowd faded. Only the canyon remained. Dust swirled. Flags snapped. Then, just for a second, the storm eased. Maria's finger curled around the trigger. Pressure smooth, steady. The rifle cracked, the sound exploding through the canyon. The bullet vanished into the distance, and the world held its breath. For 3 seconds, the bullet was the only thing that existed. Maria didn't breathe, didn't blink. The recoil had faded, but she kept her cheek pressed to the stock, eye glued to the glass, tracking an invisible path across 1,400 yards of turbulent air. The crowd was silent, 1,200 people holding one breath. The steel plate shimmered, a ghost in the crosshairs. Heat distortion bent the image. Wind twisted the canyon into chaos. Then a sound so faint, so distant, it might have been imagined, clang metal. Striking metal. Hit. The spotter's voice crackled over the radio. Then louder, incredulous. "Dead center hit." For half a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Devil's Canyon erupted. Soldiers leapt to their feet, shouting. Reporters screamed into microphones. Camera flashes strobed like lightning. The canyon became thunder, sound rolling and breaking against rock. Maria stayed frozen, her breathing ragged, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had hit it. She had done the impossible. "Sergeant." Corporal Jackson was suddenly there, face split by a grin so wide it looked painful. That was God. That was incredible. But Maria hardly heard him. She lifted her head slowly from the scope, blinking at the target in the distance, 1,400 yards away. The steel plate swayed, scarred by a single perfect impact. It was real. She rose to her feet. Around her, the crowd still roared, but their voices blurred. Her eyes locked on the figure approaching, General Hayes, walking with deliberate slowness through the chaos. The crowd sensed it and hushed, the silence folding back over them. Hayes stopped in front of her, the old soldier who had built his life on tradition, the woman who had just shattered it. For a long moment, they only looked at each other. Then Hayes did something no one expected. He raised his hand and saluted. "Staff Sergeant Santis." His voice carried clear and strong. That was the finest display of marksmanship I have ever witnessed. A ripple swept through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. Soldiers leaned forward, stunned. Hayes's eyes didn't leave hers. "I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about what it means to be a soldier." The canyon roared again, cheering, stomping, shouting. But Maria barely heard it. Her throat tightened, her chest heavy. She had made the shot. But more than that, she had cracked something far heavier than steel. "Respect." Hayes turned, facing the crowd. "Witness it," he called. The impossible shot made possible. The roar built until it shook the ground beneath their boots. Maria felt hands clap her shoulders, recruits pulling her into the chaos. Jackson, Thompson, Rodriguez, even soldiers who had doubted her, but she couldn't celebrate. Not yet. Her gaze drifted back to the canyon, to the plate swaying gently, scarred by her bullet. It wasn't the steel she'd struck. It was the doubt that had clung to every step of her career. The impossible shot had found its mark. Later, after the crowds thinned and the media began packing up, Maria stood at the canyon's edge, rifle case in hand. The sun was sinking, shadows stretching across the jagged rock. Hayes approached quietly. He removed his cap. Then his general's stars, two silver insignia that had defined him for over a decade. He held them out. "These belong to someone who earned them today," he said, voice rough. Maria stared at them, her chest tightening. She shook her head. "General, I didn't make that shot to take your rank. I made it to prove I deserve mine." She gently pushed his hands back. "Keep them, sir, but use them differently. Use them so the next woman doesn't have to prove herself in front of the entire world." For the first time, Hayes looked small, human. He nodded once and pinned the stars back onto his uniform. "I thought I was protecting standards," he said quietly. "Turns out I was only protecting my own assumptions." They stood side by side, looking out over the canyon. The wind howled, carrying away the last echoes of the shot. Over the next weeks, Fort Braxton changed. Hayes kept his word. Training shifted. Standards measured performance, not preconceptions. Soldiers began to request Maria's instruction, eager to learn from the woman who had made history. The graffiti on the sniper wall, "Girls can't shoot," was scrubbed away. In its place, new words appeared, painted in bold letters: excellence through merit. Maria found herself busier than ever. Recruits lined up for her classes. Corporal Jackson was promoted to sergeant, serving as her assistant. "I used to think the Army was about tradition," he told her one evening as they watched recruits train. "Now I think it's about creating new ones." The ripple spread far beyond Georgia. Applications from women for combat roles surged. Reports of harassment dropped. Commanders spoke differently. Something had shifted, and not just on paper. Maria wasn't just a sniper anymore. She was a symbol, a reluctant one, but a symbol all the same. 6 months later, she received an unannounced visitor, General Patricia Morrison, the retired pioneer who had once called her in the barracks. Morrison stood at the edge of the range, arms folded, watching Maria instruct. "Recruits, I had to see it myself," she said. 30 years ago, I fought every step alone. You've turned your challenge into a teaching moment for an entire generation." Maria paused, lowering her rifle. "Ma'am, the real lesson wasn't about marksmanship. It was about what happens when people are willing to admit they might be wrong." Morrison smiled faintly. "I hear Hayes has become quite the advocate for merit-based advancement." Maria laughed softly. "Yes, ma'am. I'd almost call him a convert. But even with progress, shadows lingered. Some officers muttered about special treatment. Some soldiers resented the attention she drew. And Maria herself wrestled with the truth. Why had it taken a bullet in front of the world to prove her worth? Still, the canyon had spoken. 1 year later, Maria stood again at Devil's Canyon. A plaque now marked the spot, in recognition of Sasji Maria Santis, who proved that excellence knows no boundaries. Devil's Canyon, 1,400 yards. August 11th, 2025. General. Hayes stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. "Any regrets, Sergeant?" he asked. Maria considered the question. "About the shot?" "No, sir. About the fact that it was necessary?" "Every day." Hayes nodded. His eyes lingered on the canyon floor. "I wonder how many soldiers we lost, talented ones, because we couldn't see past our assumptions." She looked at him. "The important thing is we learn, sir, and teach others to do better." They walked back toward the base together. The canyon wind trailed behind them, carrying the faint echo of a bullet that had changed everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it doesn't argue, it simply acts. What happens after the impossible is done? Maria asked herself that every morning when she laced her boots and stepped out onto the parade ground. The dust was the same. The flag still snapped in the wind. The recruits still shuffled, nervous and loud, before she cut through their chatter with a word. But nothing was the same. The shot had changed everything. Her classes overflowed. Soldiers who once sneered now lined up for her instruction. They wanted to learn not just ballistics, but patience. How to breathe when the world pressed in. How to steady when chaos wanted to shake you apart. Corporal Jackson, now Sergeant Jackson, worked at her side, running drills, correcting posture, drilling wind calls into wide-eyed recruits. One evening, as the sun bled across the Georgia hills, he said something that stuck. "You know, Sergeant, I used to think the Army was about tradition, about doing things the way they'd always been done. But now, I think it's about building new traditions, ones worth passing down." Maria only nodded, but inside, something shifted. He was right. The graffiti that had greeted her first day, "Girls Can't Shoot," was gone, painted over with bold black letters. "Excellence through merit." At first, she'd hated it. Hated that it marked the wall, reminding her of what came before. But as weeks passed, she came to see it differently. It wasn't a slogan. It was a promise. News of the canyon shot spread further than she expected. Recruits at Fort Benning whispered about it. Soldiers in Afghanistan emailed her, calling her the sniper who silenced the canyon. A major at the Pentagon referenced it in a policy briefing. Applications from women surged. Not just snipers, pilots, rangers, combat medics. Something about her bullet had torn down more than a steel plate. But Maria didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired, because beneath the celebration, resentment lurked. Some soldiers still muttered. Some officers still shook their heads. They said she'd been given a stage, that others could have made the shot if given the chance. She let the whispers pass, but at night, alone in her barracks, she felt the weight. Why had it taken a public spectacle to prove what should have been obvious? Why had one bullet been asked to carry centuries of doubt? 6 months after the shot, her phone buzzed. A visitor, General Patricia Morrison, the pioneer who had once called her in the barracks. Maria met her at the range. Morrison stood tall, older now, her hair silver, but her eyes sharp as glass. She watched silently as Maria guided recruits through wind calls. Then, finally, she spoke. "I had to see it for myself 30 years ago. I broke barriers one miserable inch at a time, alone, angry. You," Morrison gestured to the crowded firing line, "you turned your trial into a teaching moment for an entire generation." Maria set down her rifle, squinting into the sun. "Mom, I don't feel like a pioneer. I just wanted to be left to do my job." Morrison gave a dry laugh. "That's what every pioneer feels like. We don't choose the fight. It chooses." U.S. They stood together in silence, the pop of rifle fire in the distance. Then Morrison's voice softened. "You carried something heavier than a rifle that day. Don't forget it." Maria didn't answer. But when Morrison left, she felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Because Morrison was right, she hadn't just carried her own name. She had carried every woman's. And that weight wasn't going away. Meanwhile, General Hayes transformed before her eyes. He who had once doubted her became her unexpected ally. He walked the ranges, stopping to speak to recruits about merit over prejudice. He lectured officers on measuring skill, not stereotypes. He even published articles in military journals about the Devil's Canyon shot, calling it a lesson in humility, not just precision. Some mocked him, called him soft, said he'd been under pressure. But Hayes didn't flinch, and for Maria, that was harder to accept than his hostility had ever been, because his respect felt real. One afternoon, she found him waiting near the canyon plaque. He looked older than she'd ever noticed. The sun caught his silver hair, the lines around his eyes. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "I thought I understood what made a soldier. 30 years of service told me tradition was enough. Turns out I had a lot to learn." She studied him for a long moment. "Sir, I don't want to be remembered for a single shot." "You won't," he said, "but sometimes one shot is enough to start something bigger than yourself." Weeks turned to months. The canyon shot became legend, a story told in chow halls and classrooms. Maria tried to focus on the work, on the students in front of her, but the legend followed her everywhere. Reporters requested interviews, politicians wanted her face on pamphlets, parents wrote letters, telling her their daughters looked up to her. Sometimes she felt proud. Other times she felt like she was being carved into a statue she didn't ask to be. And always, in the quiet moments, doubt crept in. Had she been lucky? Had the wind shifted in her favor? Had that one bullet struck because the canyon chose mercy? At night, when the range was silent, she replayed the shot in her head. The feel of the trigger, the sudden stillness in the air, the clang that echoed. Across the canyon, she tried to remind herself, it wasn't luck. It was training, years of sweat, pain, practice, but doubt was stubborn. It lived in the cracks of her armor. 1 year later, Maria stood again at Devil's Canyon, alone this time. A plaque marked the spot where her bullet had changed everything. She traced the letters with her fingers. Excellence knows no boundaries. She closed her eyes. The canyon wind still twisted and howled, wild and unpredictable. It had no memory of her bullet. The canyon didn't care, but she did. "Any regrets, Sergeant?" She opened her eyes. General Hayes stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. Maria considered the question. About the shot? No. About the fact it was necessary? Every day, he nodded slowly. "I wonder how many good soldiers we lost, because we couldn't see past our own assumptions. The important thing," Maria said softly, "is that we learn and that we teach others to do better." They stood in silence, staring into the canyon. It had been just one bullet, one impossible shot, but its echoes hadn't stopped, and Maria knew they never would. What does a soldier do when their enemy is no longer doubt, but time? Maria thought of this the day General Hayes retired. The ceremony was held under a wide Georgia sky, the kind that makes metals glint like fire. Soldiers packed the parade ground, saluting a man who had once defined Fort Braxton by tradition, and who had since rewritten his own story. Maria stood near the front, dress uniform pressed sharp, her sniper's pin gleaming. She caught his eye as he stepped to the podium. For once, his voice carried not authority, but humility. "I spent 30 years believing I knew what made a soldier," Hayes said. "Discipline, tradition, following the book. But then a staff sergeant reminded me that strength is more than rules. It's the courage to admit when you're wrong." Heads turned toward Maria. She kept her face still, but her chest tightened. Hayes finished his speech, accepted his folded flag, and when the band struck its final note, he walked to her. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small box. Inside lay a custom-engraved rifle scope, polished and gleaming. On its side, the coordinates of Devil's Canyon. Beneath, 4 words. For the shot that changed everything. Maria held the scope carefully, not as a trophy, but as a weight. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. Hayes shook his head. "No, thank you." The following week, Maria received her own orders. Promotion. Sergeant First Class. Assignment. The Army's premier sniper school. When she read the message, her first thought wasn't pride. It was fear. Fear of leaving behind the recruits who had fought at her side. Fear of walking into another place where she would again be the first, or the only. That night, Jackson knocked on her door. "Congratulations, Sergeant First Class," he said, grinning. "Don't say it like that," she muttered. "Like what?" "Like I've already earned it." Jackson leaned against the doorframe. "You did, with 1 bullet. and with everything that came before it. She looked away. What if I can't live up to it? He shrugged. Then you do what you taught us. Breathe, adjust, take the next shot. Maria smiled faintly. Sometimes her students sounded wiser than she felt. At the sniper school, the air smelled different, sharper. The ranges stretched wider. The drills ran harder, and the instructors, most of them men with decades in combat, watched her with guarded eyes. She knew the looks. She had lived them before. But something was different this time. The Devil's Canyon shot had traveled here before she had. She wasn't a stranger to them. She was a story. Some respected her for it. Others resented it. But none ignored her. On her first day, one of the instructors, an older master sergeant with a scar across his cheek, approached. I've read the reports. He said, Canyon wins, 1,400 yards. Dead center. Maria nodded once. He studied her, then gave the faintest smile. Welcome to the school, Sergeant. Let's see what else you can teach us. It wasn't a challenge, not entirely. It was curiosity, and in that she heard possibility. Weeks turned to months. Maria found herself shaping new shooters, drilling them on patience, on rhythm, on the art of knowing when not to take a shot. Her classes grew popular, not because of her name, but because of her method. She spoke less about bullets, more about breathing, less about targets, more about moments. Anyone can fire a rifle, she told them one evening as the sun sank. But a sniper learns when to wait, when silence speaks louder than a trigger pull. The recruits listened, eyes steady. And Maria realized she was no longer just proving herself. She was planning something that might last beyond her. But even as she taught, the echoes of the canyon stayed with her. Sometimes at night, she dreamed of it. The hush of 1,200. People holding their breath, the stillness that lasted only a heartbeat, the clang of metal, so distant, so final. She would wake sweating, heart racing, asking herself the same question. Was it skill or luck? And in those quiet moments, she hated the canyon as much as she loved it, because it had given her everything and stolen her peace. 6 months into her assignment, she returned to Fort Braxton on leave. The range wall had been freshly painted. Again, the motto remained, excellence through merit beneath it. Someone had stenciled a new line in neat black letters. Remember the canyon. Maria stood there for a long time, her hand brushing the words. She wasn't sure if she liked them, because memory was heavy, and she carried enough of it already. That evening, she walked back to the canyon itself. The plaque stood silent, polished by the wind. She crouched by the edge, staring down into the shadows. You still don't care, do you? She whispered, 1 shot, 1,000,000 shots. You don't care. The canyon didn't answer. It howled, twisted, carried dust across her boots. She smiled faintly. And maybe that's the point. As she stood, she noticed footprints in the dirt fresh. She turned, hand on her sidearm. A group of young recruits stood a few yards back, eyes wide. Sergeant Santys? One asked, nervous. We just wanted to see where it happened. Maria studied them. They looked so young, faces barely lined, uniforms crisp. Boys and girls who had grown up hearing the story. She nodded once. This is the place, but don't let the plaque fool you. The canyon doesn't care about legends. It only cares about wind and distance. One of the recruits frowned. So, how did you hit it? She paused, then gave a small smile. By remembering that it's not about the shot, it's about the shooter. They nodded, hanging on her words. She turned back toward the base, the echoes of their footsteps following her, and as the wind tugged at her sleeves, Maria realized the truth. The shot was over. The canyon was silent. But the story was just beginning. Why did they look at her like that? Maria noticed it more each day at the sniper school. Young soldiers, men and women alike, staring at her in the chow hall, in the classroom, on the range. Their eyes weren't curious anymore. They were expectant. They weren't just watching her. They were measuring themselves against her story, and that scared her more than Devil's Canyon ever had, because a legend, she realized, can't be heavier than a rifle. The Army loved legends. The tales of impossible battles, of soldiers who stood alone, of bullets that found their mark when everything said they shouldn't. But legends had sharp edges. They made people forget that behind every story was a human being who had bled, doubted, broken. Maria was no exception. At the school, her classes had become the most requested. Recruits begged to be assigned to her. Some came prepared with notebooks, filled with calculations, ready to study her every word. Others brought nothing but awe, expecting wisdom to flow from her like scripture. She tried to give them what she could on the range. She knelt beside one nervous recruit whose hands shook on the trigger. "It's not the rifle," she whispered. "It's you that wins. Part of the fight, but so is your heartbeat. Calm one, and you can read the other." The young soldier nodded, steadying, and when his bullet found its mark, he nearly wept. Moments like that mattered. But at night, alone in her quarters, Maria stared at the rifle scope Hayes had given her. Engraved with the canyon's coordinates, she kept it locked in a case, not on display. She told herself it was a reminder, but deep down, she knew it was a weight, because every recruit looked at her with expectation, was asking the same question. Without saying it, could they ever measure up to her shot? And Maria wanted to tell them the truth, that no one should have to. But the Army didn't work that way. One night, Jackson called her from Fort Braxton. He was leading recruits there now, following the training model she had built. They painted a mural on the wall, he said. "You, in the canyon, rifle aimed, underneath." The words, "Take the shot." Maria went quiet. "You okay?" Jackson asked. Yeah, she lied, but she wasn't, because she didn't want recruits to worship her. She wanted them to believe in themselves. Still, she returned to work each morning, carrying the burden silently. It was during one particularly long training cycle that she met Private Daniels, barely 19, fresh out of basic, eager but clumsy. His first shots went wild, his breathing ragged, his frustration boiling until he slammed his fist against the rifle stock. Maria crouched beside him. "You're fighting yourself harder than the wind." "I can't do this," he muttered. "Neither could I, at first." He blinked at her. "Disbelief plain. You?" She nodded. "I missed more than I hit, but missing is part of learning. The canyon didn't forgive me because I was perfect. It forgave me because I refused to quit." Daniel swallowed hard, eyes wide. "You really think I can get there?" Maria smiled faintly. "I don't think I know." For the first time, he looked at the rifle not with fear, but with possibility. It was recruits like Daniels who reminded her why she stayed, why she bore the legend's weight, even when it pressed down harder than the Georgia heat. But legends had costs. Maria had little time for herself. Letters from home went unanswered. Family birthdays passed without her presence. Old friends stopped calling. She didn't blame them. The Army had taken her time, but the legend had taken the rest. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she'd traded too much. One evening, she received another unexpected visit. General Patricia Morrison again, walking the line of recruits, her sharp eyes studying everything. When the class ended, she pulled Maria aside. "You're carrying it, aren't you?" Morrison asked softly. Maria frowned. "Carrying what?" "The legend, the weight of it. I know the look. I wore it for years. Everyone sees your strength, but no one sees your silence after the lights go out." Maria hesitated, then sighed. "They think I'm a story. I want to tell them I'm just a soldier." Morrison shook her head gently. "You can't. You're both, the story and the soldier. The trick is learning to live with both, without letting either consume you." Maria stared at her quiet. "How did you do it?" "I didn't," Morrison admitted. "I broke under it. I only wish someone had told me what I'm telling you now. You don't have to be everything to everyone. Just be honest. Let them see the cracks. It won't make them respect you less. It'll make them respect you more." The words sank deep for the first time. Maria wondered if part of her strength lay not in being untouchable, but in being human. Weeks later, she tested it. During a class, she paused mid-lecture. Her recruits waited, silent, sensing something different. "When I made the canyon shot," she said, "I was terrified. My hands shook. My heart was so loud I thought the scope would rattle off the rifle. I wasn't fearless. I was scared." The room shifted. Recruits leaned in, listening. "Harder. But I pulled the trigger anyway. And that's the difference. Not being fearless. Being afraid. And doing it anyway." Silence lingered. Then one recruit whispered, "That's what courage is." Maria nodded, and for the first time since Devil's Canyon, she felt lighter. The legend wasn't just a shot. It was the fear she carried into it, and maybe sharing that truth could lift some of the weight from her shoulders. Still, she knew there would always be a cost. When the Army called again, offering her a choice between advancing her own career or staying to train the next generation, she hesitated. Advancement meant prestige, influence, a bigger stage. Staying meant smaller victories, but deeper ones. That night, she walked alone to the range. She set the scope Hayes had given her on the dirt, staring through its glass at the stars, and she whispered a question only the canyon could hear. "Do I keep climbing? Or do I stay and teach?" The wind answered in its usual way, wild, untamed, shifting, and Maria knew the choice wasn't easy, because every step forward meant another piece of herself given away. How does a legend end? Maria asked herself that question as she stood once more at Devil's Canyon. The wind screamed the same way it always had, indifferent, untamed. The plaque still gleamed in the sunlight, the engraved words catching the morning light. Excellence knows no boundaries, but she wasn't here for the plaque. She was here to say goodbye. It had been years since the shot. Years since Hayes had retired with his stars intact, his legacy transformed. Years since Jackson had taken over her program at Fort Braxton, turning it into a model for bases across the country. Years since Morrison had told her that strength wasn't silence but honesty. Maria had lived all of it, the teaching, the mentoring, the pressure, and the quiet doubts that still came in the dark. Now, she was at a crossroads again. The Army had offered her a post in Washington Advisory. Political, the kind that looked good on paper, but took her far from rifles, far from the dirt, far from the young soldiers who still looked at her like she carried the weight of the canyon in her hands. Part of her wanted to take it, to step away, to finally let the legend belong to history instead of her shoulders. But another part of her knew, if she left, the legend might be twisted, polished into something it never was. Because the truth wasn't a clean story about heroism. The truth was messy. She'd been afraid. She'd been doubted. She'd been sabotaged. She'd been lucky. And still she'd pulled the trigger. She wanted that truth remembered. Behind her, footsteps crunched. She turned to see Jackson approaching, older now, but carrying himself with the same quiet respect he'd shown the day he chose to stand by her locker instead of against her. "You couldn't leave without visiting, could you?" he asked. Maria smiled faintly. "No, this place doesn't let go." He stood beside her, staring out at the canyon. "Recruits still ask about you every week. They think you're 10 feet tall." She laughed softly. "Tell them I'm not. Tell them I was terrified." "I do," Jackson said. "But they still call you the one who silenced the canyon." Silenced. She thought about that word. No bullet had ever silenced the canyon. The wind still howled. The dust still danced. The air still twisted bullets off course. But maybe the silence wasn't in the canyon at all. Maybe it was in the way thousands of doubters had gone quiet when her shot rang out. Maybe the canyon was never the target, she murmured. Jackson looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She exhaled slowly. The target was never steel at 1,400 yards. It was the men who thought women couldn't hold a rifle. It was the commanders who thought tradition was stronger than change. It was every soldier who whispered girls can't shoot. She looked back at the plaque. That was the real shot, and I didn't take it alone. You all stood with me. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Finally, Jackson said quietly, "So, what's next for you?" Maria didn't answer right away. She crouched, touched the dirt where she had once laid prone. Her cheek pressed against the stock, her hand steady despite the storm. She remembered the silence before the shot, the weight of every eye, the impossible demand. And she remembered the truth that had carried her through. It's not about the shot. It's about the shooter. She stood, brushing dust from her palms. "I'm going to Washington," she said. "Not because I want the politics, but because I need to make sure the next woman doesn't need a canyon, or a crowd, or a miracle to be believed." Jackson smiled. "They'll listen to you." "They'd better," she replied, her voice steady, "because I've already proven I can't." "Miss," they laughed, the sound almost lost in the wind. As they turned to leave, Maria cast one final glance back at the canyon. The steel plate still hung in the distance, scarred and swaying. A reminder that some battles weren't won with explosions or parades, but with silence, patience, and a single bullet's path through chaos. The canyon remained wild, unbroken, indifferent. But she had marked it forever, not with a hole in steel, but with a truth. That excellence has no boundaries. That courage is not the absence of fear, but its companion. That dignity doesn't shout, doesn't argue, doesn't ask for permission. It simply acts, and sometimes all it takes is one impossible shot.